Hey everyone, this is Ethan Grundberg, a regional vegetable specialist with Cornell Cooperative Extension's Eastern New York Commercial Horticulture Program. I'm going to take you on a quick tour today of a few of our research fields from a reduced tillage trial where we're trying to adapt commonly used systems for upland mineral soils to high organic matter muck soils down here in the Black Dirt region of Orange County, New York. You can see behind me, this is a field of rye, which was seeded in mid-September last year. We allowed it to overwinter, put on a lot of growth in the spring, and smothered out a lot of the weeds that we would have typically seen growing in the early part of the season, which is one of the benefits that we're trying to measure in this research, which is funded by the Specialty Crop Block Grant of the USDA AMS program and administered by the New York Farm Viability Institute. This field was terminated with a glyphosate application about 2 weeks ago, and about 3 days after that glyphosate application, we came in here with a slightly modified vacuum seeder to establish a kabocha squash crop. You can see that this squash was planted about a week ago now, and it's just starting to emerge through this heavy residue, which is exactly what we want. One of the goals of this research is to try to identify the cover crop species that will give us the most residue for longest, not only to suppress weeds, especially in row where that crop is, but also to help provide us with cleaner winter squash at harvest time. We've now moved over to a field of winter barley that was seeded on the same date as the winter rye that I just showed you. The winter barley performed fairly well, although if we do pan down for a moment, we'll see that there are more kind of blank spots. We didn't get an even establishment in this field, unfortunately. So we've got excellent establishment of our cash crop, that kabocha squash. However, I am a little nervous about some of the patchiness where we might see some weeds break through this mulch. One of the challenges that we have faced is that sometimes in the fall we don't have cooperative weather that allows us to establish a good fall seeded cover crop. So we're also assessing the efficacy of a couple of spring seeded cover crops. In this field behind me, you'll see a field of oats that was seeded in mid-April of this year. You can see it's starting to seed out. It's about ready to terminate with glyphosate and get one of our later mid to late June plantings of kabocha squash in this field. We've also experimented with spring seeded barley, as well as spring-seeded mustard species, several different mustard species, though none of those mustard species provided adequate weed suppression to really warrant further investigation this year. Okay, so just to review, here's a list of all the cover crop treatments included in the trial, the seeding rates, and the rough price per acre of cover crop seed by treatment. I mentioned in one of the segments earlier that the mustard cover crop species that we had trialed in 2019 did not perform very well. There are two primary reasons that they didn't do well. First, the residue from the mustard cover crops broke down too quickly since they tend to have a lower carbon to nitrogen ratio and less lignified carbon when compared to the grasses that we've included in the trial. Second, the mustards simply did not produce sufficient above ground biomass, which is just a fancy term to mean the weight of the plant material growing above ground. Let's take a quick look at this biomass data from our 2019 cover crops. You can see that the grasses like oats and barley produced the most biomass. It also is worth noting that we were able to mix in some of those mustard species as well with those grasses and still maintain good biomass production. This can be helpful, especially for growers who might be looking to qualify for conservation incentive programs that may require the use of multi-species mixes for cover crops. However, when we take a look at these mustard species by themselves, you can see that they all kind of tend to be at the lower end of biomass production. The three mustard species that we looked at are T. raptor, which is a sort of forage turnip, Kodiak, which is a biofumigant brown mustard, and Braco white mustard, which is by far the most commonly used mustard cover crop species in the region. Again, though, all three were at the bottom of the list in terms of biomass production. Let's switch gears and take a peek at the data from our trials in 2020 so far. You'll see we really reduced the number of cover crop treatments, but we're also able to successfully establish those two fall seeded covers that we talked about earlier, the winter rye and the fall barley. The spring seeded oats and barley are leading the pack in terms of biomass production, but I do want to note that the rye and fall barley had already begun to dry down a bit when we sampled on June 2nd, so that might partially explain the lower weights there. The other thing to keep in mind is that rye in particular produces really long lasting, high lignin content residue that doesn't break down very quickly. Therefore, even if the rye crop doesn't produce as much biomass as the spring seeded grasses, it may perform just as well in terms of weed suppression and keeping that kabocha squash clean at harvest. Stay tuned for a couple more videos that we'll be producing over the next months, focused on how these trial fields did in terms of weed suppression and with the squash quality at harvest. Thank you again to the USDA and New York Farm Viability Institute for sponsoring this work, and to Sarah Tobin for editing this video. If you have questions about the trials, feel free to reach out to me at eg572@cornell.edu for more information.